Afternoon light floods St. Helena Cathedral in Paris, where a young bride in her wedding gown sits in her wheelchair, asking if he has arrived when the doors burst open and her groom walks in, turns his back, removes his ring and says, "I cannot do this," before walking out through gasps and whispers. The church falls silent as the bride drops her head and tears stream down her face. Then a voice from the back row calls out, "She should not be left alone. I will walk her out." And a single father steps forward holding her fallen bouquet. Ethan Cole was 38 years old. A single father and carpenter who'd served in the military before his wife's death forced him to choose between service and parenthood, leaving him with calloused hands, a gentle demeanor, and warm eyes that had seen too much loss. He made furniture for churches and homes, work that kept him close to his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, while providing enough income to keep them comfortable, if not wealthy. Lily was bright and innocent, always saying things like, "Dad says everyone who's lonely needs someone to hold their hand." And Ethan had brought her to St. Helena that afternoon because she'd begged to see a fairy tale wedding, not knowing they were about to witness something far more complicated. Clara Dubois was 28, a former interior designer who'd been paralyzed from the waist down in a car accident 2 years ago. Her life divided sharply into before and after, when she could walk and when she couldn't, when her fiancé looked at her with love, and when that love slowly transformed into pity and resentment. She'd watched their relationship deteriorate as her recovery stalled, watched him pull away even as he insisted he was committed, but she'd clung to the belief that their wedding day would reset everything, that standing at the altar would remind him why he'd proposed in the first place, not realizing that he'd already made his decision days ago and was just waiting for the courage to execute it. Ethan had been contracted to build new pews for St. Helena, beautiful oak benches designed for accessibility, and he'd stayed for the wedding to ensure everything was properly arranged, sitting in the back with Lily, who was mesmerized by the flowers in the bride's dress. When the groom entered and immediately turned away, removing his ring and saying he couldn't go through with it, Ethan felt Lily's small hand grip his tightly. "Dad, she looks like Mom did before she died, so sad," his daughter whispered. And something in that observation broke through Ethan's usual reluctance to interfere in others' lives. He stood before he'd fully decided to move, walking down the aisle as whispers erupted, reaching Clara, who sat frozen in her wheelchair, face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Ethan knelt beside her, removed his jacket, and draped it over her shoulders. "You don't need to stand," he said quietly, "just for her. You just need to know you're not alone." Clara looked up at this stranger, mascara running, confusion and gratitude mixing in her eyes, and when he stood to push her wheelchair toward the exit, she didn't protest, just gripped the armrests and let him guide her through the church as guests parted like water. Outside, media photographers who'd been waiting for wedding photos instead captured something more powerful. A bride in full wedding regalia being wheeled away by a man in work clothes. Dignity salvaged from humiliation by a stranger's instinct for kindness. The image went viral within hours. Mystery man rescues abandoned bride. And by evening, news crews were trying to identify both Ethan and Clara. Ethan had simply taken her home, helped her inside with the help of her shocked mother, and left before anyone could thank him properly, wanting nothing except to protect his daughter from the media circus he sensed was coming. The priest later told reporters, "When that man said, 'I'll walk her out,' the entire cathedral went silent, and I realized I wasn't watching someone save a situation. I was watching someone save another person's dignity, and there's a profound difference between the two. One is about optics and the other is about humanity, and this man chose humanity without hesitation." Within 24 hours, the photo had been shared millions of times, with people calling Ethan everything from a hero to an opportunist, their projections revealing more about themselves than about him. Clara spent the day fielding calls from reporters and well-meaning friends, each conversation exhausting her more than the last, until she finally turned off her phone and sat in the quiet of her apartment, still wearing her wedding dress, because she couldn't bring herself to take it off, like removing it would make the humiliation final. Her mother tried to help, but Clara sent her away, needing to process the double trauma of being left at the altar and becoming an international news story in a single afternoon. Ethan avoided the media entirely, declining every interview request and telling Lily they needed to stay home for a few days until the attention died down. But Lily, with the directness of childhood, asked the question he'd been avoiding. "Dad, are you going to see the sad bride lady again? She needs a friend." Ethan didn't have a good answer because part of him wanted to check on Clara, while another part knew that inserting himself further into her life might make things worse. But a week later, when the initial media frenzy had calmed to a low rumble, Clara's mother tracked him down through the church and gave him Clara's address with a simple message: "She wants to thank you." He went that evening, bringing Lily, because he didn't have childcare, and because his daughter had been asking about the bride every day. Clara answered the door herself, still in her wheelchair, but dressed in comfortable clothes, her face free of makeup and somehow more beautiful for its vulnerability. "You didn't have to do what you did," she said, voice quiet. "I don't want anyone's pity." Ethan shook his head. "I don't pity you. I just know that being hurt shouldn't mean being alone, and you were alone in a room full of people, so I did something about it." The honesty disarmed her, and she invited them in. Lily immediately charmed Clara by presenting her with a crayon drawing of a bride in the most beautiful dress she'd ever seen, and the child's uncomplicated affection made Clara smile genuinely for the first time since the disaster. They talked for hours, Ethan and Clara discovering unexpected common ground, both of them navigating life after loss, both raising or being raised by someone else, both trying to figure out how to move forward when the future they'd planned had been demolished. Clara told him about the accident, about waking up unable to feel her legs, about her fiancé's gradual withdrawal disguised as support. Ethan told her about his wife's cancer, about the terrible helplessness of watching someone you love fade, about learning to be both mother and father to a child who needed more than he sometimes felt capable of giving. In the following weeks, they began meeting regularly, casual coffee meetings that stretched into long conversations, and Clara started visiting Ethan's workshop where he was building accessible furniture. "I'm making a chair for someone with disabilities," he said one afternoon. "I thought maybe you could help with the design. Bring your expertise to make it actually useful instead of just technically accessible." The request surprised Clara because most people in her life had stopped asking her to contribute professionally, treating her disability like it had erased her skills. But Ethan saw her as a designer first and a wheelchair user second. They worked together designing a line of furniture that was both beautiful and accessible. Clara sketching while Ethan built prototypes, their partnership becoming something neither had expected to find after their respective losses. During late nights in the workshop, they shared deeper truths, Ethan admitting that he sometimes felt guilty for not being enough for Lily, for not being able to give her the mother and father she deserved, and Clara confessing that the night of the accident was the night she'd seen her wheelchair for the first time and believed her life was over, that everything she'd worked for and dreamed of had been stolen by circumstance. "Nobody's life ends when they still want to help someone," Ethan said, and the words hit Clara like revelation, reframing her situation from loss to possibility, from what she couldn't do to what she still could. She cried then, and Ethan let her, understanding that some tears were about release rather than weakness, and when she finally looked up, she was smiling. "Thank you for making me believe I'm still useful, still valuable, still someone worth knowing." Her gratitude made Ethan uncomfortable because he genuinely didn't see his actions as extraordinary, just human, but he accepted her thanks because he understood she needed to give it. A coworker at the workshop later told a podcast, "I watched them work together until late at night, sharing food and laughing like old friends. And the thing that struck me was how Ethan never looked at Clara with pity, just respect, like her wheelchair was furniture instead of a defining characteristic. And you could see it was healing something in her that had been broken long before the wedding disaster, a belief that she was less than because of what her body couldn't do. But healing isn't linear. and neither of them were prepared for the complications that come when the past refuses to stay buried, when public attention creates pressure, and when two damaged people try to build something new while still carrying the weight of everything they've lost. 3 months after the wedding that never happened, Clara's ex-fiancé gave an interview to a major news outlet, his carefully crafted narrative designed to salvage his reputation at her expense. "I withdrew from the wedding because I didn't want Clara to be married out of pity," he said, looking earnest into the camera. "I loved her too much to let her settle for someone who wasn't certain, and I made the hardest choice of my life by walking away so she could find someone who'd love her completely." The interview went viral, public opinion shifting as people praised his difficult decision and questioned whether Clara had been manipulative in expecting him to proceed with a marriage he was uncertain about. Clara watched the interview alone in her apartment, each word landing like a physical blow, and she recognized the technique. He was rewriting their story to make himself the hero and her the burden, using her disability as evidence of his sacrifice rather than his abandonment. Friends who'd supported her started making comments about how brave he'd been, how hard the situation must have been for him, unconsciously reinforcing the narrative that loving someone with a disability was an act of charity rather than just love. The accumulated weight of everyone's assumptions and his calculated lies made Clara question everything, including whether Ethan had helped her out of genuine caring or the same pity everyone else seemed to feel. She stopped responding to Ethan's messages, avoided the workshop, retreated into the isolation she'd fought so hard to escape. And when he finally showed up at her apartment, she met him at the door with walls firmly rebuilt. "Maybe he was right," she said, not inviting Ethan inside. "Maybe I shouldn't want people to love me out of obligation or guilt. Maybe I should just accept that this is how things are now." Ethan's expression didn't change, that calm that came from having faced worse. "Pity doesn't make someone abandon everything to walk toward you in front of hundreds of people," he said. "Pity doesn't make someone spend 3 months designing furniture together. Pity is distant and safe. What I feel for you isn't pity." But Clara was too raw to hear it, too hurt by the public narrative to trust anything, so she closed the door literally and figuratively, and Ethan went home to explain to Lily why they wouldn't be seeing Clara anymore. "Are you sad that Clara doesn't want to talk?" Lily asked, seeing through her father's composed exterior. "Yes," Ethan admitted, "but I can't force someone to stay. People only stay when they choose to, and Clara has to choose herself before she can choose anyone else." His daughter nodded with 7-year-old wisdom, accepting this adult truth she didn't fully understand, but sensed was important. 2 weeks later, Clara received an award for Chairs of Hope, the accessible furniture line she'd designed with Ethan, the judges praising the innovation and thoughtfulness that made beautiful design accessible to everyone. Clara attended the ceremony alone, scanning the audience for Ethan despite herself. And when she didn't see him, something inside her broke differently than before, not shattered but cracked open, because his absence meant he'd respected her boundary, even when it cost him recognition, had prioritized her choice over his pride, and that kind of respect was rarer than she'd realized. During her acceptance speech, Clara's prepared remarks dissolved into raw truth. "The person who co-created this with me taught me that standing up doesn't mean walking with your legs. It means moving forward with your faith in yourself and in others," she said, voice shaking. "He's not here tonight, but these chairs are my thank you to him for seeing me as a designer first and a wheelchair user second, for treating my contributions as valuable instead of charitable, for showing me that I'm still capable of creating something meaningful." The audience applauded, but Clara barely heard it, too focused on getting through the speech without falling apart completely. After the ceremony, rain was pouring down outside, and Clara struggled with her wheelchair and umbrella, cursing the weather and her independence and the universe for making everything so difficult, when a familiar voice said, "I promised to walk you out, and I keep my promises." Ethan stood there, soaked from waiting, holding an umbrella he positioned over her wheelchair. Clara looked up at him, rain and tears mixing on her face. "I thought you'd be angry that I pushed you away," she said. Ethan smiled. "I'm not angry at someone who's learning how to trust again. Trust takes time after it's been broken, and you needed time, so I gave you time." Clara started crying in earnest then, not sad tears, but released tears. Everything she'd been holding crashing out in the rain while Ethan stood quietly beside her wheelchair, not trying to fix or rush, just present. "I was so scared you helped me because you felt sorry for me," she finally said. "That everything you said was just kindness to a disabled woman who needed charity." Ethan knelt in the rain, eye level with her. "Clara, I helped you that day because leaving you alone felt wrong. I kept seeing you because you're brilliant and funny, and you challenged me, and I fell in love with you because you're you. The wheelchair is just how you get around. It's not who you are, and if you can't see that yet, I'll wait until you can." The words hung between them, love declared not in a romantic setting, but in rain and parking lot lights. And Clara realized this was more real than any fairy tale proposal could have been, because it was honest and hard-earned and built on actual knowing rather than assumption. She reached for his hand. "I'm sorry I pushed you away," she said. "I'm learning, and I'm slow, but I want to try trusting again, trusting you." Ethan stood, keeping her hand in his. "Then let's go home," he said. And the simplicity of that statement, the assumption of shared space and future, made Clara smile through her tears. A reporter who witnessed the parking lot reunion wrote, "They didn't say much, just stood there in the rain holding hands, and you could see in her face the peace that comes from finally believing someone sees you completely, and in his face the patience that comes from loving someone enough to let them find their own way back. And it was the most honest moment I've ever seen between two people. No performance, just truth." 6 months after the disastrous almost wedding, Clara and Ethan officially launched Renew Designs, a company specializing in furniture and spaces that were accessible without sacrificing beauty, combining Clara's design expertise with Ethan's craftsmanship and their shared commitment to dignity. The workshop became a second home for all of them, Lily doing homework in the corner while her father built and Clara sketched, the three of them eating dinner together more often than apart, family forming not through legal documents, but through daily chosen presence. The business grew faster than they'd anticipated, architectural firms and interior designers discovering that accessible design didn't have to be institutional or medical looking, that it could be sophisticated and desirable to everyone. Clara found herself doing consultations and design work that utilized all her training and talent, her wheelchair becoming irrelevant to clients who valued her eye and expertise. Ethan built pieces that were structurally sound and beautiful, work that satisfied something in him that military service and survival had never quite reached. The creation of beautiful, functional things rather than the destruction or mere endurance that had defined too much of his life. One afternoon, while Clara was teaching Lily how to sketch furniture designs, the child asked with characteristic directness, "Miss Clara, when I grow up, how do I help sad people be happy?" Clara set down her pencil, touched by the question. "Exactly like you're doing now, making everyone around you smile, making people feel seen and valued, doing what comes naturally to you." Lily nodded seriously, processing this, then announced, "Then I'll keep doing that forever." Ethan, watching from across the workshop, caught Clara's eye and smiled, and she felt something click into place. The understanding that this was family now, that Lily's questions and Ethan's steady presence and her own daily choices had created something real and lasting. They started speaking at conferences about resilience and accessible design, telling their story not as inspiration porn, but as honest testimony about choosing to move forward after loss, about building new dreams when old ones die, about finding unexpected family in unexpected places. The photo of Ethan pushing Clara out of the church had become symbolic, used in articles about kindness and intervention, but they tried to redirect attention from that single moment to the ongoing work of showing up for each other, of daily choosing connection over isolation. During one speaking engagement, an audience member asked Ethan why he'd helped a stranger that day in the church, and his answer was characteristically simple. My wife died when Lily was 3, and in the aftermath, strangers showed up in ways that saved us. People brought meals and watched my daughter and reminded me I wasn't alone. And I learned that crisis reveals who people really are and who they want to be, and I wanted to be someone who showed up. He glanced at Clara. I just didn't know that showing up once would turn into showing up every day, that helping a stranger would become loving a partner. But I'm grateful for every unexpected turn this took. Clara added her perspective, talking about the difference between pity and respect, how one diminishes while the other elevates. When Ethan pushed my wheelchair out of that church, he wasn't rescuing a helpless disabled woman. He was supporting someone who'd been abandoned in a moment of vulnerability. And that distinction mattered. It still matters, because how people treat you in your lowest moments tells you who they are. And Ethan showed me I was worth standing beside, not standing over. The audience response was powerful, many people crying, and afterward, they were approached by dozens of people wanting to share their own stories of finding unexpected support or being that support for others. The viral photos anniversary arrived, and media outlets wanted interviews about where they were now, what had happened in the year since that moment. Clara and Ethan agreed to one joint interview, using the platform to promote renewed designs and accessible architecture, and when asked if they were together romantically, Ethan just smiled. We're together in every way that matters. We're partners in business, in parenting Lily, in believing that good design should serve everyone. And yes, we're in love. But love is the foundation, not the headline. Clara reached for his hand. He taught me that standing up isn't about your legs. It's about your heart, and I'm more myself now than I was before the accident, before the disaster, before I met him, because I'm not trying to prove anything anymore. I'm just living. A volunteer at one of their speaking events later wrote in a blog post, "Watching them work together, you forget about the wheelchair completely. You just see two people who've been through hell and decided to build something beautiful from the wreckage. And their daughter Lily embodies the best of both of them. Ethan's steady kindness and Clara's creative courage. And it makes you believe that families can form in the most unexpected ways, that love can grow from crisis, that second chances aren't just possible, but sometimes better than first chances because you know enough to value what you found. From today forward, I choose to look at people one heartbeat longer, to see past circumstances to character, to recognize that showing up in someone's worst moment doesn't make you a hero. It just makes you human in the way we're all supposed to be. I choose to value people for who they are rather than what they can do, to understand that everyone is fighting battles we can't see, to be the person who stays when others walk away. Because Ethan didn't save Clara that day in the church. He just refused to let her be alone. And sometimes that refusal to abandon is the most powerful thing we can offer. From today, I will live kindly. 1 year after the wedding that never happened, St. Helena Cathedral hosted another ceremony, but this time the energy was completely different, quiet and intimate rather than elaborate and performative, with only close friends and family filling the first few rows of those accessible pews Ethan had built. Clara sat in her wheelchair wearing a simple white dress, no elaborate train or cathedral veil, just elegant simplicity that reflected who she'd become, someone comfortable in her own skin and circumstances. Ethan stood at the altar in a well-fitted suit, calm as always, but his eyes held anticipation and joy that anyone could see. When the priest asked if he took this woman in sickness and health, for better or worse until death parted them, Ethan's answer was immediate and clear. I've been holding her hand since nobody else would, and I'm not letting go, not for circumstance or difficulty or anything else life throws at us. I choose her every day, and I'll keep choosing her. The simplicity and certainty of his vows made several guests cry, including Clara's mother, who'd worried her daughter would never trust anyone after the abandonment. Clara's vows were equally direct. You taught me that I'm not my wheelchair, not my accident, not my limitations. I'm the person I choose to be every day, and you've made it safe for me to choose love again, to choose trust, to choose building a future even though the past hurts so much. Her voice shook but held strong. I choose you, Ethan. I choose us, and I choose the life we're creating together. Lily, serving as both their flower girl and ring bearer because she'd insisted on both roles, ran forward after the vows and hugged them both, announcing to everyone, "Now, Dad has a wife, and I have a mom, and we're a real family." The congregation laughed and applauded, and the priest, the same one who'd witnessed the disaster a year ago, performed the ceremony with visible emotion, seeing redemption and healing happening in his church. When he pronounced them married, Ethan knelt beside Clara's wheelchair and kissed her gently, and the photo captured that moment. The groom on his knees, not in supplication, but in equal partnership, both of them smiling through tears. The reception was held in the church courtyard, simple food and dancing, with Clara moving her wheelchair in time to music, while Ethan danced beside her and Lily spun in circles between them. People who'd witnessed the original disaster and this redemption spoke about the difference, how the first ceremony had been about appearance while this one was about substance, how you could feel the difference between obligation and choice. As evening settled and guests began leaving, the three of them remained in the courtyard, Clara and Ethan holding hands while Lily chased fireflies. "Do you think we would have found each other if that disaster hadn't happened?" Clara asked, watching their daughter play. Ethan considered this. "I don't know, maybe not. Maybe we needed our worst moments to find our best possibilities. But I'm grateful for every step that led us here, even the painful ones." Clara squeezed his hand. "Me too, even the wheelchair, even the abandonment, even the humiliation, because all of it led to this, to you, to us, to understanding that being chosen is better than being promised." They sat in comfortable silence, wedding guests departing, evening turning to night, and Clara realized this was what she'd been searching for all along. Not a fairy tale or a performance, but just steady presence, daily choice, love built on reality rather than fantasy. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, stories that remind us that our lowest moments can become doorways to something better, that dignity matters more than pity, that love is a choice we make every day rather than a feeling that happens to us, leave a comment and subscribe to HA Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten, the moments when someone chose to stay when leaving would have been easier, when crisis revealed character, when unexpected families form from kindness and courage. Share this with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to choose differently, to build something real from something broken,